when there's absolute kinds of the ideas from the top to the top, rather than like the liberal society where diversity is there and a lot of people are fighting against each other because they want to achieve their own interests in certain area, right? We teach in these kinds of under the liberal democracy, like we teach the children that diversity is something valuable. We also openly government cherishes the diversity itself. However, we think it is so wrong to teach the children that say, hey, diversity itself is important. Rather than that we have to teach them more practical way in the end of the day, lessening down the conflict and make a more healthier debate in the society throughout the educational system. Which means that alright, so I'm not going to my policies that rather than we are going to teach the children that hey, like diversity is important. Like even if like you do not like their ideas, you have to cherish their idea. However, we're going to sending the messages that hey, sometimes the ideas cannot be invalid. However, and sometimes the ideas can be valid. However, we are going to teach you that the ability that whether that idea is invalid or not. I think the opening government strongly believes that these kinds of the social narrative in the end of the day make more better platform to everyone to voice up their opinions. In my arguments, I'm going to clarify two things. First of all, what is the role of the education? So why it is okay for governments to spread out certain ideology to the society and induce people in certain ways the government wants. In second argument, I'm going to prove you why it is better education teaching children to ways judging ability of opinions validness. Before going on any arguments, yes, please.
Would you clarify what you mean by valid?
We think the valid is that they're full of rationality and full of reasons of they saying these kinds of ideas. However, Madam Speaker, the reason why the opening government fundamentally believes that these educational narratives are failed already is because that we always say there is enough check and balance system that even if there is extreme ideas such IS's idea of these kinds of the extreme idea can be naturally opt out from the mainstream. However, it is not so. When we're thinking about the social cost or when we're thinking about the negative social impact, which is really, really huge, thinking about how many people ISs are going to terrorize against or the racial discrimination is already there, still there, and it's not solved out. When we're thinking about these kinds of the negative impact, we think this is fully justifiable. Going on to my first argument. We think, Madam Speaker, this is for class arguments because we think the children are potential social members, right? In that cases, we want, because the government wants a better society by these children, the next generation, there is a full justification there. Why? Because the impact of everyone's opinions and values is that, diversity is important. However, there is some cases that the people do not accept and should not accept in the society, right? In that cases, we do not accept and we do not say, hey, that those kinds of the ideas that it may seem wrong, however, still they are valid because we cherish diversity. Rather than that, we think, so we think the extreme cases are still there and there is no check and balance system to opt out and push this idea from the overall society. However, we are to focus on also the middle areas ideas such as discrimination against LGBT or the social minority people, or these kinds of the middle areas ideas are also debatable in these cases. Then going on to my second argument, I'm going to show you why when we debate about these kinds of the middle area issues, why our cases are more healthier. Why? Because in our counter policies, we teach the children and we educate the children how to judge their opinions or the validness of the opinion based upon what they said. Thinking about the education right now, we just giving the factual information to the children, and then let's say, hey, these kinds of the factual information, and then we just let them be there without guiding how you judge which arguments or which facts are important issues or whether or not. We just teach the children, hey, this is a democracy. Democracy is first voting system, second diversity. We also protect the minority. However, we think this is not enough. Why? Because we think there are a lot of issues the government have to solve out, which is however, government are still not the years of the 2016, but still the problems are there, and even worse. Thinking about the Trump saying that how his actions are so much aggressive toward those kinds of toward illegal migrants or the Mexican people or the Hispanic people, right?
So are you saying that parents and teachers are in the best position to judge whether or not
There.
argument
We
is
think
correct or wrong?
government is the best position to say and spread out a certain idea to the society, because this is always we do so. When government think which people should contribute to the society well, then we make a policy and push them to follow these kinds of action, right? These are the same thing, because we think in a certain ways, we think the government there is a need of these kinds of the policy, and then we have to raise up the ability to everyone to counting each opinions. Then that is the reason why we push this policy, right? So this is the same thing. We think in the cases now the children will know how to judging the way of the argument. We think there is a strong, because this is the same way when we judging the debate itself. This is the main argument and main clashes, and whether there is minor problem, right? We are saying we're gonna do the same thing and let the children do the same procedure. They now from our policy we're gonna teach them how to judge these opinions, and then especially for the mirror areas issues such as euthanasia, abortion of the people. In that cases, we will not just say, oh, they are different, they have different idea, and then that is valid. Rather than that, we're gonna first judging whether that idea itself is valid or invalid, and second of all, we're gonna by these kinds of the educational system, they will decide their own position to go for these kinds of idea or go against these kinds of idea. So in the end of the day, we think there will be less social conflict and more healthier debate procedure. Have to propose.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition.
Here. Here.
We're not entirely sure what government wants to do with these children. They say that they want to raise these children to be respectful and to engage in healthy dialogue, yet they have failed to provide you with a mechanism as to why, if we stop educating children to appreciate the validity of every opinion, how that's going to magically happen. I think I can integrate all my rebuttals into my substantives. First, let's frame this a little bit. We're living in an increasingly individualistic society, where people are being actively encouraged to be selfish and aggressively pursue their own interests for success. If we live in this world, we believe that it is crucial that we teach children to listen to other people, whether they think they make sense or not. What's happening in the status quo? We're currently indoctrinating children from a very young age to listen to other people and respect their opinions. Usually this type of education happens in the earlier stages, from kindergarten to elementary, and in some instances, middle school as well. First, I think opening opposition is the only team who understands how do children develop, right? First, children are born as a blank slate, meaning that they have no rationality, they're not in a position to judge and compare their opinions with other people. But moreover, because they're in a blank slate. The only things that control their desires and their actions are basically biological programming, what all of us are born with, things like survival instincts, right? That's why we believe that children are inherently programmed to be selfish. Why? Because it is their body and it is their brain that tells them that in order to survive, they must fulfill their selfish interests, right? This is why babies cry so much and throw a fit when they're in an uncomfortable position, when they need food, etc., right? Second, what kind of children do we want to raise? I think OG said this, but I'll repeat it just to make sure. First, we want them to have a healthy self-esteem. Second, we want them to engage in a healthy dialogue. And third, we want them to have a general respect for others. Why? Because all of these facts amount to the fact that eventually this leads into building a healthy society where people respect each other and are not afraid of engaging with dialogue with each other. Alrighty. Later. I'm going to tell you why childhood education is so effective. For two reasons. First, we start this education at a very early age, giving us a lot of time to teach them what is the right way to live. And second, these children are generally flexible to development, meaning that because they're born in a blank slate, their brain is incredibly flexible, especially if you look at neurological scientific data. We believe that it is easier to fix a badly behaving child than a badly behaving adult. And third, childhood education is really important because what we learn in our childhood usually sustains during our lives, meaning that all of us in this room remember how to behave and how to have manners and how to respect each other, not because we were taught about that yesterday in university class, but because when we were young, it was our parents and it was our teachers who taught us that, right? All right, moving on. What does it mean to be valid? Because OG tried to tackle this, but they didn't give it a new standard. They say that it must be substantiated, it must be rational, but the thing is, we already told you that children are not in a position to judge whether something is rational or not. So which means that inevitably, this sort of validity must be put onto some sort of arbitrary standard, meaning that it will be the teacher or it will be the head of the Ministry of Education who's ultimately going to decide which opinions are valid or invalid, right? So on their side, they claim that valid simply means right or wrong. We believe that it is more extreme than that. Because valid opinions, or when ideas have inherent value, I'll take it later, have inherent values, meaning that it doesn't have to be, an idea doesn't have to be necessarily right in order to be valid, right? Because even racism, sometimes people have their own rationale, or people have their own reasons for doing that. I think in this case, even if an idea is wrong, it is inherently valid. An invalid idea is an idea simply has no reason. It is not only wrong, but is also worthless, and therefore you have no incentive to engage with it whatsoever. I'll take one phone, closing.
Opinions saying that black people worth less, LGBTs are scums, Jews should be exterminated, obviously are invalid opinions within democracy. Why do you even support those opinions?
I already told you that ideas such as anti-Semitism and racism all exist in the status quo. Yes, we do agree that they're wrong, but that doesn't mean that these ideas simply should never be engaged with, right? So what happens under their world? Because like I told you, we already live in a society that promotes being narcissistic, and children are born inherently selfish in order to survive. What's probably going to happen? Because now, invalid ideas are not only wrong, but they simply have no worth to be engaged with. Meaning that now schools will teach them that, hey, racism is inherently wrong, so don't even learn about it, don't even listen to it, right? And they say that they want to promote healthy debates, right? This is simply not going to happen on their side if children never engage with these ideas in the first place. But second, the fact that you're now putting an arbitrary line between being valid and invalid means that out of 100 ideas, some of them must be invalid, meaning that that shouldn't be always other people, but it also means that your opinion can be invalid as well. Meaning that if a child is in a group thinking situation where everybody else disagrees and you're the only person who happens to have that opinion, you immediately feel ostracized, right? You don't have any reason to empower yourself because why? Majority rules, right? Whatever you think, your opinion is invalid and therefore you should immediately give up your opinion. This is really bad because this is a program that inhibits and actively damages a child's development of self-esteem because ultimately we want to teach kids to be brave and actively question. But second, why do healthy debates actually happen on our side? I told you that this whole indoctrination like validity and invalidity of ideas happen at an earlier stage. But notice how when we progress to middle school and high school and eventually university, we do teach these kids to actively challenge other people's ideas. We teach them how to do things like debate. We ask them to write papers and do group projects to research on different ideas and coming up with pros and cons. So all of their harms that they claim on their side of how kids are now being brainwashed into believing whatever people tell them actually don't happen, right? The reason why the status quo is so good is because we preempt this to happen. When they're young, we tell them, okay, you need to first listen to everyone's opinion in order to engage with them. When they're older, that's why we teach them the tricks, the mechanisms to see, okay, this argument is wrong because of this, racism is because of that and this. Because of all these reasons, I'm very, very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
In a status quo where there's a world filled with diverse and contradicting and so much complicated ideas, that's why we as a government feel the necessity of to teach the children the ability to criticize each other and to think, to challenge each other very in the early age, as kindly as the officer pointed out the importance of early age education. So I will further explain you why in our narrative, teaching children to challenging diverse ideas will be better achieved at the very end of the day. So firstly, as we can see in this debate, the idea of veiled and unveiled itself is very arbitrarily lined, which can be never objectively or never objectively formed in the first place. We rather think those kind of veiled and unveiledity itself is dependent on individual level. So we think we have to cater and guardian those children to better have ability to choose which one is veiled and which is not veiled for yourself, rather not from the society, but rather not from the teachers. So we basically think we need children to focus more on the reality rather than the ideal words. Our concept is very similar to something like this. Instead of teaching children you should not fight, rather we will teach children, yes, we should fight, and we will teach them when to fight and what is a healthy way to fight. We don't think our concept is something very different from this. We want to teach children why to you those feeling that you want to oppose some kind of ideas or conflict some kind of ideas, something natural, and we will tell you how to further deliver your ideas in those kind of things, not now. Those things. We think opinions can go either way. It could be veiled and not veiled. So we want to teach children how to do this. Because the narrative that every opinion veiled usually works with the following conclusions. Every opinions are veiled, so you must not fight with each other, or your opinions are so valid, every opinion matters, so you don't have to challenge other ideas, or you don't need to make those kind of conflicts. We think those kind of narrative education is forcing those children to hard for them
Before
to
we move
deny
on.
certain ideas or deny certain ideas coming from those educational stages. We think it's extremely hard from those narratives, even for children, because the characters of children are already very vulnerable to have vulnerable and high possibility of being indoctrinated by their educators or teachers or like parents. We think it's in itself children learning those kind of ability to grow their own ability to choose which one to veil and unveil is better achieved in the narrative where first teaching every opinions are not veiled, and it's up to you who to decide which one is veiled or not veiled. So further on, we want to talk about why making children to building those kind of ability for children is something very valuable and something that can be contributed to the society by engaging to the case of opening up. They take not now, ma'am. When they first come up and talked about why teaching them to children. When first come up and talked about why it is not why we can have other alternative teaching children when they're grown up. We think because we don't think that racism or those kind of LGBT issues that children faces are not always happening in those later older age of development. We also think those kind of racism issues or some LGBT issues can also happen in the children age, where even in kindergarten class, one like white children calling other black children in a very offensive way. We think by making them to challenge those ideas in a very early stage will help them to calling out those kind of microaggressions or calling out those kind of like offensive words even in those kind of early stage of their development. And this can further lead this shows how society should be taking stances or to guard those children to make a healthier society. Yes.
How can children ever actively challenge an idea that they never have an incentive to fully understand in the first place?
We don't think because racism is something awful, children should never go look at it or should never even know what those kind of concept is based fundamentally wrong. Because first you have to know those racist concepts and what is this racism should be going on, and then that's why they can now further challenge those ideas and criticize those ideas or whatnot. So we don't think because the idea is so bad, we don't think it's a healthy way for children to make them not seeing those kind of problems or just neglect those kinds of problems. And furthermore, we want to talk about how children can dealing with those kinds of problems in the early ages is important, because they will be the one of the society's member at the end of the day and end of the future. So we as an open government believe that education is not only about what's best for the children, but also about how we want to form as healthy social members at the end of the day, which is the goal of the education. So in our stance, by providing those kinds of narrative and tracking down those conclusions coming from these their narrative where every opinions are veiled, we want to ensure those children to furthermore challenge or conflict those ideas, which can lead to their own ability to talk about those different ideas, but also to engage in those kind of social like discourses or even debate in those kind of early ages steps. So, and we think this is very important experience within those childhoods, because when they can finally know they can challenge those ideas or even think there are problematic things within those ideas, with those kind of experience, we think children now have those confidence and further on to be a very active social members when they're grown up, challenging or opting into diverse discourses already happening in society, where we've proven they're already in status quo. There are so many contradictory and controversial or diverse opinions. We think there is a way to have more healthier and secure individuals when we develop those kind of ability in the very early stage of education. Any more PYs? Out of it. Okay. So as the problem of those narrative of every opinions are veiled is basically it always comes with the other conclusion. So you should not fight, or we should not make conflicts. So by breaking down those premises of every opinion veiled, and rather have a counter narrative, every opinion could be veiled but also can be veiled but also not can be veiled. We want to allow children to furthermore challenge or further build those abilities to make decisions by themselves, which we believe is a much more healthier social member at the end of the day. So proud to be.
All right, thank you so much. To conclude the open house debate, the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Judges, we think it's a prerequisite in order to discuss and debate and basically crash down what you would like, discriminatory ideas. The prerequisite of itself is to know how to rationally analyze what's a problem of those discriminatory ideas, what's the essence and the aspects that we need to target down, rather than just emotionally shout down that we think discrimination is bad.
Hear, hear.
I think opening government is basically having, I guess, a good principle that discrimination is bad, but I don't really get how they're actually going to do it. Because basically what they're saying is that we need to teach them to say wrong things are wrong. We're not opposing to that idea itself, but the more accurate question is, when we teach them whether ideas can be valid into an age when there are children, that itself should be a critical debate. Let me move on to all arguments and rebuttals integrated into basically 3 points of analysis. Let's go on to the first idea, because closing government raised up an interesting question, right? Because there are obviously discriminatory ideas, and that's basically our target. Points of rebuttals. Number one, we think on their case that there are obviously discriminatory points that have absolute no room for debate, absolute no room for discussion, that we could rather argue that this is either having value or not, that it's definitely invalid. It's basically a minor extreme case, which is the majority of reasons and ideas that we have in the world are rather controversial. Probably racism can be an invalid idea under your world, but the way of Donald Trump and how he portrays it to the idea in the United States of America of whether Mexicans or immigrants are harming the economy of the United States of America, that itself could be a controversial issue that you cannot necessarily just blame out that it's all obviously discriminatory ideas. We think that's a minor case. But let's move on to the more important case, because our target group right now are children. The idea of children are that they are beings that are irrational, who cannot have the ability to rationally analyze what's a problem. So two points of why this is a problem. Number one, if you're not going to teach them that all ideas are valid, at the same time that they don't necessarily have the capability to analyze what's truly a valid idea or an invalid idea. So under your paradigm, some ideas might be valid. To them, you cannot necessarily grant that they could all analyze what's a good, valid idea and what's an invalid idea. Unless you're going to give a list of what's supposed to be valid and what's supposed to be invalid, you're definitely leaving it up all upon to the opportunity for the children to be the voter and to be the one who would identify and recognize what's a valid idea or not. Which is why we think this rather goes on to the opposite way of whether this is an unhealthy discourse. Why? Because my leader of opposition already explained to you the characteristics of a human being that are basically centered around the idea that they are self-interest and selfish, meaning that their ideas are probably going to be valid onto their side, because the interest of what they want to do is probably going to be centered and targeted toward themselves. Additionally, with the lack of ability to rationally analyze and calculate of what is right and what is wrong, which is why we think that itself is not necessarily going to be done. We think, therefore, their possibly best case scenario that we could give is that discrimination is going to be embedded, and if you have discriminatory ideas, you understand that's invalid. Let's try to take that case. Therefore, they stay quiet. We think at least on that best case scenario as well, we'd rather have a better world because people who have embedded ideas of discrimination are now not really going to shout out and to explain and talk about their own ideas of discriminatory aspects. Meaning that children in classrooms who honestly think that African Americans don't gain rights, or probably in the society who think that gays shouldn't have rights as well, are probably not going to go on to active discrimination because not going to go on to active discussion because the idea of how we teach them that some things, that all ideas are valid, are under the premise that you have the right to talk about what you have because your idea itself has a value, has an aspect that you can talk about. Why is this bad? We think that that's going to lead on to much more access onto having less fruitful discourse because the way of how we actually destruct discriminatory ideas and arguments is that you actually talk about it, you have conversations about it, and you basically progress ideas to develop onto that, and that's basically what's going to happen. Let's move on to the second case then, because they basically want to talk about Donald Trump. This is why we think it's rather better onto our side. We think the problem of the status quo of the United States election and Donald Trump is that everyone thought emotionally that discrimination is bad, Donald Trump's basically stupid, we don't necessarily need to care about it. They basically, what they did was ignore the Donald Trump's idea, told other people that if you support Donald Trump, you're probably a bigot, you definitely just ignore them and isolate them from the society. You don't necessarily go on to fruitful discussion, rather you ignore aspects of what happens automatically without actually studying, analyzing the aspects of what you actually constructively take down from the other side. What we would have is that you take the initiative step that, okay, maybe some aspects might be valid. Maybe this have value on explanation and conversations. Let's look on what are those aspects. And then you critically, objectively identify and notice what are the points that you need to disrupt, what are the points that probably you might be wrong, and that's how you lead on to critical discussions. And we think this is really crucial into the idea of when you have a flexible mind, when you have development that you could possibly give as a children, which is why we think that it extensively is a benefit. Closing up, government, do you have a pure? Closing.
The premise of your benefit is that we can tackle down those kind of discriminations by doing discussions. But as you said, the children are so immature and so flexible, and it means that children sometimes obey the authority of other children. How to engage them?
Wait, say that again, the last one.
And the children are flexible. It means it will influence by other people who are strong, other children who are strong in that community.
All right, sure. That's the point. We think embedded discrimination is rather worse onto a scenario. Rather, we would have it right off to the surface. As you can say that people can influence other children, we don't think that that's necessarily going to be better onto your side because embedded discrimination in the end is what happens as your irrational actions in the end. So if you have embedded discrimination in your mind without actively expressing it, that's how you lead on to discrimination of employment because you actively in the end don't employ a black woman, which is why we think embedded discrimination is rather bad because you really can't grain up to the surface and the problem and actually take down the root. Lastly, we talk about arbitrary standards because they say that everything is obvious. We think a government, an educational entity, cannot arbitrarily say that everything either is valid or anything else is invalid. Why? Because you can't justify just because you have a governmental role doesn't mean that you're always justified to say that you are correct, which is an explanation that you cannot possibly prove. Which accepting the possibility that a government can definitely be wrong sometimes, and definitely second, that they also have clear incentives to themselves as well, we think them making arbitrary standards on what is valid, what is invalid, itself is much more problematic and harmful because the government can now enforce much more violent ideas and arbitrary standards to the children, especially when they're young. We think that's bad, we want to oppose. Yeah, basically that's it.
All right, that concludes the open house. Now I'd like to invite the member of government.
I need my speech here. I don't want to be too far away.
Okay, if that's better for you, sure.
Sorry. 다시 브레이크. The opening half basically talked about like the social level in which how we create better citizens in our society. I think a more pressing issue in this context is that actually within schools there are discriminations taking place. There are bullies who bully individuals who are discriminated and seen as minorities in a society. The core problem here is that there are a vast majority of students who stay neutral to this problem, who do not report the bullying that is happening, who do not stand by those people who are being bullied. Here, Madam Chair, we think education should actively tell those children that there are some opinions that are invalid and therefore should be countered as aggressive as possible. Madam Chair, therefore this motion should stand. I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how to conduct education in the first place, and secondly, how those children perceive such education in either side of the House. But before that, one independent rebuttal towards the opposition bench. Deputy Leader of the Opposition talked about how ignoring Donald Trump was an issue. Like that misses a comparative, right? What we're aiming to do on our side of the House is that we're going to change like the perception of Trump supporters in the very first place, right? So if there weren't individuals who were supporting Trump because like they felt that it was valid to like be offensive to Mexicans, then like therefore like there doesn't exist a necessity for us to like even think about how to engage those individuals in the first place. We don't think that point was comparative. So other rebuttals will be integrated in my points. So firstly, about how to conduct education. No, thank you. Opening opposition tells us that we have to respect like each opinion, so on and so forth. Obviously, we are going to teach that we have to respect others and like we have to listen to others. Obviously, but we tell you that there are obviously invalid opinions. I already flagged this in my POI. Like the only response to this was that that's a minority issue. Like there are other controversial issues, so on, so forth. Like. Madam Chair, we don't teach really controversial issues in we don't see those issues in our morality textbooks, right? Because like education, what's on within education is decided through like the legislation, through politics, and like if it is so divided, often what happens is that it's not as if like what textbooks is going to support Democrats, support like Republicans, but actually they find a middle ground, or just they don't write those really controversial issues. So therefore, like the most relative issues in this debate are issues which are obviously bad, like discrimination against black people, discrimination against Jews. We think they're just ignoring that context. No, thank you. They tell us like we have to teach individuals how to. We already teach individuals how to debate or engage later in education, like high school, so on and so forth. Exactly. That's the exactly point. That's why like opposition's harm as to how like individuals will no longer engage with other individuals. Like that kind of harm doesn't stand in the first place. Right? Obviously, because like when children are becoming more and more rational, we already teach them that they have the ways in which they engage with other individuals and listen. We don't think that their case has a unique necessity to take this kind of education that they support on their side. Yes?
I already asked you if these children have no incentive to properly understand these opinions in the first place, how will they ever engage in it?
So okay, that leads to my second point, right? So how the children will perceive the issue in the first place. Because opening opposition tells us, and this clashes with the engagement argument from opening opposition. They didn't prove the link between education and the perception of the children. They seem to assume that if like the parents or the teachers teach that you have to like respect others, and even if it is an offensive argument, you still have to listen. That necessarily is being understood by the children. Like exactly because they also explain to us that children are incapable of making rational understandings. We don't think that is the case, right? And I'm going to prove to you this point first. So what's going to happen is that yes, they are also going to explain to the children that racism is bad, like LGBT, like blame shaming is also bad. The thing is, children will probably misunderstand this as if it is okay to be so offensive from two analyses. First, because the concept that something is valid but something should be opposed is too complex for children, right? Especially when children aren't so mature in their side of the house. We think, and second, like it becomes evident that there is some kind of like there's some kind of room for those children to like legitimize themselves, especially the children who already have those discriminatory ideas. Let me give you an example. Children often become very angry when parents tell them that when a fight occurs, and obviously a kid is being bad and the other kid is like not doing so much bad, when parents tell this kid who seemingly isn't doing bad also that there is some blame on you, this child becomes very, very angry, right? Because he or she doesn't understand this very complex idea of like the difference of blames and like, so because children tend to understand this dichotomy in a very simplistic way, right? Like good versus evil manager. Therefore, like we don't think that their characterization of like education being necessarily understood to the children is realistic in the first place. What is the outcome of this? Two analyses. First, from the perspective of bullies, we think in their side of the house, they have much more room to legitimize themselves. Why? Because often in kindergartens or like elementary schools, teachers have massive authority. That's why children seek to tell teachers that they found wrongdoings of other students because they want to gain this legitimacy or authority or backing from those like teachers that they respect or they think is an authority in the school. When they misunderstand the message of those teachers, they feel that they have room or backing of those authorities, even if they are having like discriminatory ideas and discriminatory conducts against those black individuals within society. We think this is hugely problematic. Second analysis is that from a silent majority's point of view, they will stay silent on their side of the house because they feel that you might be scolded if you counter those discriminatory people because teacher told you that you have to respect the other people's opinions. They are also valid. They should also be respected. Even if they tell them that it is a bad thing to discriminate, the children are likely to misunderstand or like fear that they are going to be scolded. What happens in their paradigm is that when those silent majorities stay silent, because teachers' capacity is limited, they cannot like monitor every single actions of their own like 40 students within their classroom. Often like those bullying occur behind the site in locker rooms or like on internet, so on and so forth. There's no one to help those bullied because the majority are not there to help them, not actively there to help them, and teachers cannot find that out. On our side of the house, Madam Chair, first, we do not give any room for legitimacy to find on those discriminatory children who unfortunately have those discriminatory ideas and bully those minorities. Second, we give much more room, on the contrary, to those silent majorities children to actually speak up and actually take the side on the bullied side because teacher actively tells them that you mustn't respect the people who actually have very discriminatory ideas because everyone is equal, and therefore we can better tackle the problems that are actually most important in this debate. That's why this motion should stand. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Member of opposition, please.
Speaker, opposition bench, especially closing opposition, will show you about children are special entities. And because they're in the most vulnerable state, and sometimes because they live in their world, because they don't know the full face of reality, we must be careful when you approach how to educate them. Because the government's consistent stance was that there was a clear way of discerning what is good or right. I have asked them in PUI, and they seem to believe that there's a clear good. We disagree. Before I move on into a few argumentations, a brief word of refutation towards the closing opposition, including government. First of all, their entire case was more of a slight extension of what opening government said, in the sense that bullying cannot be stopped if we tell them, the bullies, that your opinions are also valid. That is to say, they argue people will just leave these bullies do whatever they want to do. kids who are bullied. Madam Speaker, this is first of all unintuitive because I think the best ways to stop the bullying in its actions is to say to the bully that whoever you're bullying also may have a reasonable point. He deserves to be respected as a human being. Therefore, it is wrong for you to simply believe that whatever you think is right because that kid who's also bullying is a valid human being. Therefore, in order to counteract bullying, we think that teaching them that all opinions are valid, all humans should be respected as a human being with dignity is also a way to counter bullying. But secondly, in terms of how you counteract bullying, Madam Speaker, we think it's simply counterproductive to tell that bully simply saying, you're wrong because this is wrong. Because in the case of children, we think that they have their own logic, however childish it may seem to adults, they may have a certain way of thinking that this is wrong. In those cases, when you just go up to a child and tell them that your opinion is on face value wrong, and do not do anything that will solve or ask about why that child formed those racist opinions, we don't think that bullying or racism is ever solved on their side of the house. And I'll be telling you why those preconceptions of implicit racism actually forms by conventional norms that are formulated within families or educational systems, and why our side is in the best position to tackle them. First of all, my first extension, I'm going to explain to you more in depth on what children mean. Madam Speaker, we think that children are in a special position in the sense they have very limited knowledge about the world. What do you mean by this? Because in general cases, when it comes to even toddlers, but generally even middle school or high schoolers, when it comes to large nations like the United States, they never leave their hometown. They just live in their neighborhood, they've been living there all the time. That's to say they only act with certain people who share common ideas or shared interests, and they never get to experience the world as outside of that community. In those situations, we think that children are important because they're the most malleable part of their lives. That is to say, when they form a certain preconception based on the limited pool of knowledge that they acquired within a certain community, we think that it's most difficult for them to adjust to outside worlds because obviously the values that the outside world thinks is different from whatever community you may be living in. More importantly, this is important because education to children are stages when you prepare them to stand up to when you become adults. So when you think that the primary purpose of education is to prepare them to be reasonable adults, we think that this is important. But more importantly, we tell you about how we tackle racial biases and how social bias occurs, because I think that was mainly what the opening government and the closing government was tackled. They wish to tackle racism. They want to get how racial biases are formed, but we think that that won't occur on their side of the house. Why? Because first of all, where would those children have gotten those racial biases? Because obviously, as opening official already mentioned, the children are born as tabula rasa. We think that those biases must most likely form under their family right now. We're not saying that necessarily those parents are racist to their hearts, but for example, when it comes to LGBT rights, if they're a devout Christian, sometimes their religious beliefs may make them believe that homosexuality is a sin because that's what Holy God in the Bible tempts them to. In this situation, what they're proposing is that when these children are no longer given the option to consider what is valid or not, and when you give the full discretion to governments or local communities or to parents to make the valid judgment for them, it's more likely that the children will internalize the valid judgment made by the community. The problem is, it may not necessarily be a problem when the community makes the right decision, but often cases it doesn't happen. Because when you talk about conservative societies, preconception biases towards a certain position, we think the change is most unlikely to happen on the turn of adults. Therefore, in terms of making a more equal society, the society should focus on children who doesn't yet have the implicit biases to them. Therefore, we think that it's important for the society and the government to actively tell them not to blindly follow whatever the parents, whatever teachers may tell them to, because those teachers and parents may have a preconception that it may be wrong. Yes, closing.
Obviously, we don't support conservative religions like communities brainwashing those children, right? Well, you have to engage in the more modern context in which the government has more diverse views that are being taught to the children.
My problem is, if you don't tell the children that everyone's opinion is valid, it automatically means that you have to tell them what is right and wrong. That was the entire point what opening government mentioned. You're knifing them for not following the stance. But the problem is, when you give a certain authority to make that decision on their behalf, you must question the scenario in which how that authority will behave. We told you a plausible scenario as in, wait, well, they might not be correct. But more importantly, we'll also tell you the conditions when the answer isn't as clear-cut. As in terms of politics, right? To become a Democrat or to become a Republican isn't necessarily a question of being right or wrong. It's a question of both opinions are valid, both stances are valid. But when a certain parent is now able to tell you that the views of Democrats or the view of the opposite political party is necessarily wrong because of certain reasons, we think it's really difficult with children because these children has yet to learn about the full history of the United States or how those political parties formulate in the first place, on how these political parties interact with society. We think that those high-level educations are better done in universities or not. The children have the opportunity to interact with diverse people. That's to say, when children are forced to make a valid judgment based on what the authority tells them to, and with limited knowledge because they only live in the confines of the communities that they live in, we say that they're less likely to make the best decision that they can make at the end of the day. And the problem is when each community fosters the children with a preconceived idea of how the world should be, it's real difficult for the society when you become adults. You probably move out of your neighborhood, you probably interact with other people. It's difficult for you to accept those people and make the society a better place. So at the end of the day, if we talk about bullying, as closing government would like to mention, we think you can fight bullying by telling you that bullies shouldn't do that, shouldn't behave like that, because you also need to listen to what other people say. But more importantly, we want children to their ideas be perceived by the conventional norms, which may also be false. We think that's very important. Proud to oppose.
All right, thank you so much.
Madam Speaker, the government side tells us today that what's going to happen in the classroom of elementary kids is once we accept the fact that everyone's arguments are valid, that's giving legitimacy for not stopping the bullying, because what the bully thinks is also reasonable. We think that the more realistic thing that's going to happen within a classroom is this. The moment you tell the kids that not everyone's ideas are valid, plus the premise that opening opposition gave in terms of how people are individualistic, that's exactly when the bully can start thinking, because not everyone's ideas are valid, and my idea is valid, that's the reason why that gives me legitimacy to bully this kid, right? Because I am right, and you have the possibility of being wrong, I will bully you. We think that when we are able to tell you, we think that the very good thing about everyone's argument can be valid is that it's based on the very premise and idea of equality. That's the reason why there's less room of abuse. That's the reason why we can exactly use this rhetoric in order to tell the bullies that because the person who is being bullied also have reasons in terms of why that person doesn't want to be harmed, why that person hates this situation, that's exactly the reason why you should stop this. We think that only once we are able to tell this person, the child who is bullying, that the other person also matters. The other person also has reasons as to hate this situation. That's only when that bully can understand. Maybe that's why I should stop. That's the basis of empathy and sympathy in terms of me engaging in what that other person thinks. We think we have to embrace this principal idea in terms it's based upon equality, and therefore we want to cherish this idea and we want to go for that line of reasoning. Another problem from government is that they're conveying and depending the possibility of change on those who created the bias and are biased in the first place. We told you the premise that conventional ideas are not always right. The community idea, even if it's based on the agreement within the community, it may be wrong. That's why we want to be as open as possible. We want to prepare these children for once they go out in the world and meet other people, they are open to these ideas. We think that the only way in order to put them this idea and develop them and prepare them for the future is to open their minds up to diversity and say that although there may be different reasonings, reasonings do exist. Before I go on, yes?
The premise of your argument that bullies will justify themselves in our paradigm is that we only teach some opinions are invalid. The fact is, obviously, we're going to teach what kind of opinions are invalid. How does that work?
Okay, I'm going to explain to you the mechanism in terms of how bullies will change and how the people who are being bullied are changed in my class. So going on to the first idea of extreme discriminatory ideas and how that's going to play a role in this debate. We think that although we don't think that there's something as absolutely right or absolutely wrong, we think that there is on a reasonable base something that we agree upon as a society. Those are the things that we actually teach to the students in textbooks, right? For example, how to interpret a certain history. We think that these things, although not absolute, have a reasonable understanding and agreement within our society. That's the things, therefore, when it comes to extreme discrimination, it's out of the debate. It's not like minor or certain says, but it's because it's agreed upon our society, that's why it's out of the debate. We think that when we agree on that premise, that's the only case when we can have minimum decency while still having diverse opinions and freedom of speech while still not having hate speech, right? We think that that's the line that we're going to draw. But even in these cases, how we're going to say that your opinion is wrong is we understand that you have reasons, but your reasons are wrong because of this, not simply you are wrong because you are wrong, okay? Second, we're going to tell you about the exclusive characteristics or unique characteristics of children and why they have to be special.